The courtroom door felt heavier than it should have, like it already knew what waited for me on the other side. I stepped in wearing the same old suit I'd bought at 19 for job interviews, faded at the shoulders, a little tight at the waist, but still mine, still honest. My parents and sister sat in the front row in matching designer outfits, polished, rehearsed, ready for the show. The moment they saw me, all three of them rolled their eyes at the exact same time, like a choreographed gesture of contempt. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an inconvenience they wanted legally contained. Their attorney straightened his stack of papers, smug, certain he would win. They all thought I would fold, apologize, and quietly hand everything over. Did they really think I'd walk in here and just hand over the $2.5 trust Grandpa left me? Before we go any further, tell me where you watching from, and what time is it right now? I always want to know how far these stories travel. I wasn't surprised when they rolled their eyes at me in that courtroom. If anything, it felt like the natural continuation of a story that had begun long before the petition, long before the trust, long before any of us realized how far a family could fall just to keep one child shining. Growing up, my sister Laya was the sun in our household, bright, adored, orbit-worthy, and the rest of us were expected to revolve around her. When she turned 16, my parents bought her a brand new silver Audi with a bow on top. I still remember the photo shoot they staged in the driveway. The neighbors gathered to admire her milestone, how Mom cried because she was so proud, how Dad said, "You deserve the world, sweetheart." I was 14 then, and I stood in the garage holding a box of old holiday decorations no one had bothered to put away. 2 years later, when I turned 16, there was no car, no bow, not even a card left on the kitchen counter before Dad rushed to a meeting and Mom drove Laya to a nail appointment. When I asked tentatively if I could learn to drive, they said, "Use the bus for now. It builds character." And present. That phrase, builds character, became the default response for every request I ever made. When Laya wanted her own apartment near campus, they paid for it up front, furnished it with new IKEA pieces, stocked the fridge for weeks. When I asked if I could at least live in the dorm so I wouldn't have to juggle 3 bus transfers each morning, they said, "Dorms are expensive. Live at home or figure something out. Independence is good for you." When Laya toured private colleges on the East Coast, they flew with her, booked hotels, held her hand. When I asked if they could co-sign for community college tuition, Mom didn't look up from her tablet when she said, "You'll have to manage that on your own. You're resilient. This is how you learn." So I learned. I learned that resilience wasn't something people admired, it was something they demanded from the child they didn't plan to support. I worked my first job at a fast food chain when I was 17, then added a second job the following year cleaning offices after midnight. I took the bus everywhere, saved every dollar, registered for community college because it was all I could afford, and transferred to a state university the moment my grades and loans allowed it. I didn't complain. Not because I was saintly, but because it wouldn't have mattered. My parents had already assigned me a role, the self-sufficient daughter who needed nothing so they could give everything to the daughter who needed everything. Funny thing is, after a while, you stop noticing you're carrying the weight alone. You just get used to the ache. But there was one person who refused to let me disappear under the weight. Grandpa Elias. He wasn't loud, he wasn't sentimental, and he wasn't the type to interfere in parenting, but he saw me, really saw me in ways no one else in the family ever tried to. Every other Sunday, he would drive across town to pick me up for lunch at a little diner tucked between a laundromat and a floral shop. He always ordered black coffee and a turkey melt. I always ordered the cheapest thing on the menu until he caught on and started ordering for me. "You're allowed to enjoy things, kid," he'd say, sliding the plate toward me, his eyes warm with a quiet steadiness that made me feel like someone in the world believed I mattered. He asked about my classes with genuine curiosity, never the performative kind parents used to appear attentive. He asked about my jobs, my schedules, my professors. He listened. And sometimes, he offered the sort of advice that didn't feel important at the time, but would one day become the backbone of everything. "Your sister has luck," he told me once, stirring sugar into his coffee. "You have discipline. Discipline will outlast luck every time." Another time, After I vented quietly about financial aid forms and missing bus connections, he reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of folders, each one labeled meticulously. "Keep records," he said. "Every letter, every receipt, every email, every signature." People underestimate how much truth can be found in paper. Paper doesn't lie, even when people do. It became our running joke that he was preparing me for some imaginary trial years in the future, some inevitable moment when I'd need proof that no one else thought to keep. I didn't understand then why he was so insistent. I thought he was just old-fashioned, clinging to habits formed in his accounting days. I couldn't have known that he saw a storm coming before any of us felt the wind. Looking back now, walking into that courtroom with nothing but my old suit and a handful of folders, I realized he had been preparing me for this exact moment. Not because he expected my family to betray me, but because he trusted I would one day have to stand alone, and he wanted me to be armed quietly, invisibly, thoroughly. And maybe that's why, even after years of being the afterthought child, the independent one, the one who didn't need anything, I didn't break when the petition came. I had been forged this way. I had lived this way. I had trained for it without knowing I was training at all. Grandpa passed on a mild Wednesday morning in early spring, the kind of day when the air feels too gentle for anything tragic to happen. I was the last to arrive at the attorney's office for the reading of the will, partly because I'd taken the bus, partly because no one had bothered to tell me they were driving together. When I stepped into the conference room, Mom gave me a brief nod, like I was a distant cousin she barely recognized. Dad checked his watch, and Laya sighed dramatically as if my presence alone delayed her lunch plans. I took a seat at the far end of the table, mostly to give them space, partly because I'd spent my life being put there anyway. Mr. Ellison, Grandpa's attorney for nearly 3 decades, was an older man with gentle hands and a voice that wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. He spoke about Grandpa the way people speak about old libraries, quietly, reverently, knowing the value of things others overlook. He opened a leather folder and began reading. The first major item was the lake house, our family's pride, the place where we celebrated holidays and avoided each other in separate rooms. "To my granddaughter, Laya," he read, "I leave the lakeside property and everything within it." Laya sat up straighter and beamed, casting me a victorious glance as if this were some sort of competition I didn't know we were playing. Mom clapped softly. Dad looked relieved, as though a foregone conclusion had finally been spoken aloud. Next came the portfolio, retirement accounts, diversified equities, bonds, things my parents had always assumed were earmarked for them. "To my daughter and her husband, Mr. Ellison," continued, "I leave my managed investment accounts, to be divided equally." Mom's smile stretched so wide I thought her cheeks might split. Dad leaned back, smugness settling into him like a second skin. Everything was unfolding exactly the way they expected. The golden child rewarded, the parents compensated. The convenient one, me left with scraps. Then Mr. Ellison cleared his throat and shifted to the final section. "And to my granddaughter Zoe," he said, his tone softening, "I leave my continuing education fund." Silence fell. I felt their stares before I saw them, first confusion, then barely concealed amusement. A fund for continuing education? They were probably imagining a few $1,000s set aside for books or a certification course. Something symbolic. Something small. Something fitting for the daughter who had always been told to manage on her own. And Arius D. Mom tilted her head, offering a pitying smile as if Grandpa had left me a coupon booklet. Dad looked bored. Laya actually snorted. But Mr. Ellison wasn't finished. He adjusted his glasses, lifted another document, and said, "Before any assumptions are made, I think it's important we review the fund's history." The room shifted. Slightly. Imperceptibly. A breeze of tension. "This fund," he continued, "was established almost 30 years ago. Your grandfather contributed annually and invested it according to his personal strategy. Conservative in bear markets. Aggressive in bull markets. Always balancing with high-yield bonds." Dad straightened in his seat. Mom blinked. Laya's smirk faltered just slightly, like a candle flickering. Mr. Ellison scanned the final page. "As of this quarter, The Continuing Education Fund has a current evaluated worth of, he paused, then spoke slowly, each syllable falling like a stone into still water. $2,512,000. The world stilled. Mom's face lost all color. She looked like someone had unplugged her from an electrical source. Dad's hand jerked so violently he knocked over his water glass, ice skittering across the table, droplets splashing onto his neatly pressed shirt. Laya shot to her feet, palms slamming flat against the table. "No," she snapped. "No, that's wrong. That can't be right. I'm his oldest grandchild. I'm the one he cared about. Why would he give her?" She jabbed a finger at me like I was an intruder. "More than us." Her voice cracked on the last word, emotion leaking through entitlement. Mr. Ellison, unbothered, calmly tapped the ledger. "This is exactly what your grandfather instructed." He documented it in detail. Zoe is the beneficiary. Sole beneficiary. No co-signers. No shared management. No attachments. Dad sputtered. "A fund that size should have been mentioned." "He never said anything. Why would he keep that from us?" Mr. Ellison closed the folder gently. "Because he believed Zoe would need protection one day." The words landed like a prophecy I wasn't ready to understand. Laya glared at me, envy twisting her features. Mom whispered something to Dad, too low for me to hear but unmistakably frantic. Their world, carefully curated, rigidly controlled, was cracking, and I could see the panic slipping through. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, expectation. They had built their identities on the assumption that I would never have more than them, never outgrow the role they assigned me, never become someone they would have to respect. But Grandpa had known better. Grandpa had planned better. As the meeting ended and everyone filed out stiffly, I stayed seated, staring at my hands. $2.5 million. 30 years of preparation. A trust built quietly in the background of my life, waiting for the moment I'd need it. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming far faster than any of us realized. Because nothing threatens a family built on favoritism more than discovering the child they ignored is suddenly the one holding the most power. 2 days after the will reading, I received a text from my mother that didn't bother masking itself as an invitation. "Come home tonight. 7 p.m. Family discussion." No punctuation, no warmth. Just an order, another reminder that, in their minds, I still occupied the same role I always had. The child expected to show up, fall in line, and stay quiet. When I arrived at the house, every light in the living room was on, bright enough to expose dust on picture frames and tension in the air. My parents sat rigidly on the sofa, and Laya lounged in the armchair like a queen awaiting a subject's apology. But what pulled my attention was the man standing behind them, a tall figure with a polished briefcase, a crisp suit, and the kind of expression people wear when they're about to speak for someone who doesn't want to get their hands dirty. A lawyer. Their lawyer. "Zoe," Dad said, gesturing to the single chair across from them, deliberately isolated. "Sit." I did. The lawyer Richard gave me a practiced smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." He placed a thick packet of documents on the coffee table, neatly aligned, too intentional to be anything but a plan they drafted the moment they heard the number 2.5 million. "This," he said, tapping the packet, "is a family management arrangement." Mom folded her hands dramatically, as though this were all some unpleasant task she was forced to undertake. "Sweetheart, this isn't what you think. We're just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked. She exchanged a look with Dad, one of those silent marital communications built on decades of assigning narratives to their children. "From making mistakes," Dad said finally. "Large sums of money can ruin people. You've never been good with budgeting, and this is a lot." I nearly laughed. I wanted to ask which part of working 2 jobs, paying my own tuition, and surviving on rice and canned soup constituted not being good with money, but I held my tongue. Instead, I lifted the first page of the packet. Family management arrangement. To ensure unity, stability, and responsible stewardship of inherited assets. Below it were clauses detailing how my grandfather's gift, my lifeline, would be transferred into a consolidated family management account under joint parental oversight. In exchange, I would receive a monthly living stipend of $2,200 from my own $2.5 million. My fingers tightened around the page. So, you want to take control of the trust? Dad huffed. Not take control. Manage, together. As a family unit. I didn't know we were a unit, I said quietly. Laya rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Zoe, stop being dramatic. This is obviously the best option. You've never handled anything this big. You freak out over car insurance renewals. That's because no one ever taught me, I said. And because you had a personal assistant by 22, funded by Mom and Dad. Her face reddened. This isn't about me. It never is. I murmured. Mom shifted closer, lowering her voice into the saccharine register she used whenever she wanted to manipulate the conversation. Honey, you are impulsive. You always have been. Remember when you almost signed a gym membership contract without reading the fine print? Imagine that, but with millions of dollars at stake. We're trying to prevent lifelong consequences. I stared at her. You're comparing a gym membership to a trust fund? She ignored the question. We're offering guidance, structure, safety. I looked back down at the document. Under the stipend section was a clause stating that any expenditures over $500 required parental approval. The word approval was bolded. So I would need permission. I said slowly, to use my own money? Richard clasped his hands. Technically, yes. But think of it as collaborative decision-making. A safeguard. I let the page fall back onto the stack. And if I don't sign? The room cooled instantly. Even the lamp seemed to dim. Richard cleared his throat, adopting the apologetic tone lawyers use when delivering rehearsed threats. If you choose to decline, your parents are prepared to petition the court for a conservatorship. It's not personal. It's simply the lawful avenue available to ensure someone with limited financial experience receives appropriate oversight. My heart thudded, but not from fear from recognition. This was not a conversation. It was a cornering. A conservatorship? I repeated. You're saying you want legal control over me. Over my decisions. Over my life. Dad raised his chin. If that's what it takes to protect you, yes. Laya crossed her arms. You should be grateful. Some people would kill for this level of guidance. I stared at each of them, my family, the people who raised me, the people who barely noticed me. They weren't acting out of love or concern. They were acting out of entitlement, panic, desperation. Why now? I asked softly. You've never cared how I managed anything before. Mom opened her mouth, but the truth slipped out before she could shape the lie. Because this time, there's too much at stake. There it was. The admission. The crack in their facade. I stood, pushing my chair back. My hands no longer trembled. I'm not signing anything. Richard gave a sympathetic, utterly hollow smile. Then I'm afraid we'll have to proceed with the petition. It's unfortunate, but fully within the law. When we know whaters, I looked at all three of them, my father's cold certainty, my mother's faux concern, my sister's bubbling fury, and something inside me solidified. A steel spine I didn't know I'd grown. Do what you need to do, I said. So will I. I left with the packet still on the table, untouched except for my fingerprint on the first page, just enough to remind them I'd seen exactly what they were capable of. And just enough to remind myself I wasn't afraid anymore. 3 weeks after that meeting, the one where they tried to dress coercion as concern, the petition arrived. A process server knocked on my apartment door at 6:40 in the morning, holding a manila envelope with my name printed across the front in bold, merciless letters. He didn't look me in the eye when I signed for it. He didn't need to. Anyone could see the kind of blow that envelope carried. Inside were 14 pages of accusations written in clinical, weaponized language. Petition for permanent conservatorship. Request for immediate temporary orders. Concerns regarding respondents' capacity. I read them 3 times. Each pass cutting a little deeper than the last. According to my parents and sister, the same people who had never once asked how I managed rent, tuition, food, or transportation, I was financially incompetent, prone to impulsive decision-making, and likely to cause irreparable harm to inherited assets due to unstable emotional patterns. And winto is fort of the maybes, unstable emotional patterns. I sat on my couch, staring at that line until the words blurred. If anyone had unstable patterns, it was the family who alternated between ignoring me and trying to control me. But because they were three voices loud, unified, perfectly curated, they sounded credible on paper, and credibility is currency in court. The petition also requested emergency oversight of the trust until a final hearing could be scheduled. They wanted immediate access, immediate control, immediate victory. I should have been shocked, hurt, furious. Instead, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped the middle out of me and left the shell behind. The next blow came that afternoon. My manager called me into her office, expression tight, voice careful, like she was stepping across broken glass. "Zoe, we received a third-party notice about a pending legal matter involving you and a conservatorship petition." My stomach dropped. "From who?" "We can't disclose that," she said, which meant she absolutely could but didn't want to say it out loud. "Given the nature of our work and the sensitivity required, HR has decided to place you on temporary administrative leave until the matter is resolved." "Leave?" I repeated. "Without pay?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "We'll reevaluate in 60 days. I wanted to explain that the petition was fraudulent, that my family was attempting a financial takeover, that none of this reflected my actual character or competence, but my manager's expression had already settled into the fixed stiffness of someone whose decision was final. I walked out of the office without a job, without income, with a legal battle looming like a storm on the horizon. News travels fast in families like mine. Faster, actually. By the next morning, my aunt had left me a voicemail dripping with judgment, disguised as concern. "Your mother called me, sweetie. She's so worried. Why would you force them to take legal steps? Just sign the agreement and avoid humiliation." Uncle Brooks texted, "This is disappointing. Think of your parents' reputation." A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent a message saying, "Your sister is devastated. How could you let money come between family?" Money. Coming between family. They all parroted the same narrative, so perfectly aligned it was obvious where it originated. In their eyes, I wasn't the one being attacked, I was the one causing trouble by refusing to surrender. Even my best friend, Alma, tried to be gentle but missed the mark completely. "Maybe you should just compromise," she said over the phone. "Give them some control so they calm down. It's not worth ruining your life over this." And Ressos, and 1A, of Facefall. But wasn't that exactly what they were doing? Ruining my life because they couldn't stand the idea of me having something they didn't? For the first time, I realized just how isolated I was. How carefully my family had crafted the illusion that they were loving, functional, united. How easy it was for outsiders to believe them and assume I was the unstable outlier. I stopped answering calls. I stopped checking social media after someone tagged me in a post questioning my fitness to manage finances. I stopped sleeping through the night because each time I closed my eyes, I saw the word incompetent stamped across every future I'd worked to build. The hearing was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of watching my savings drain on rent and groceries. 3 weeks of reading and rereading the petition until the accusations began to feel like prophecies. 3 weeks of wondering if maybe, just maybe, it would be easier to give in. There was a moment, one quiet, suffocating night, when I sat on the floor of my apartment with the petition on one side and the unsigned family management arrangement on the other. 2 paths, both terrible. If I fought, I risked losing everything: my job, my reputation, my sense of stability. If I surrendered, I lost the trust, my autonomy, the last gift Grandpa had ever given me. Both options led to pain. One just tore my identity apart more slowly. I asked myself a question I never thought I would ask: is it worth it? Is any of this worth it? Would it be better to avoid scandal, avoid the fight, avoid becoming the villain in a story I didn't write? I didn't have an answer that night. I only had the silence of my apartment, the heavy thud of my heartbeat, and the flicker of something I hadn't yet recognized as strength. But the next morning, something shifted. I saw Grandpa's old leather briefcase under my bed, the one he'd given me years ago. The one he always carried to our Sunday lunches. And for the first time since the petition arrived, I felt a spark of clarity. I wasn't alone. Not really. Grandpa had left me more than a trust. He had left me tools. And he had left me a warning. I pulled the briefcase out, placed it on the bed, and opened it. Whatever came next, I knew the answer wasn't surrender. It never had been. Grandpa's briefcase had always been a mystery to me, one of those old, worn things people carry for decades until it becomes an extension of their identity. I used to tease him about it, saying he should upgrade to something with wheels. He'd just tap the leather flap and say, "This holds more than paper, kiddo. It holds memory." Back then, I didn't understand. Now, as I set it on my bed and unlatched the brass buckles, I felt the weight of that truth settle across my shoulders. Inside, everything was arranged with the meticulous care only Grandpa possessed. Labeled folders, clipped stacks of receipts, photocopies of documents, even a small notebook filled with his tidy handwriting. I sifted through them, searching for anything that could help me understand why he had set up the trust exclusively for me and why, all these years, he had been quietly preparing me to protect something he never explicitly mentioned. Toward the bottom of the case, tucked beneath an accordion folder of tax records, I found a slim envelope sealed with tape that had long since yellowed. My name was written across the front in his familiar print, for Zoe, if needed. The conditional phrasing made my breath catch. Grandpa had known. Somehow, he had known. Inside the envelope was a single stapled document, stamped and notarized years earlier. The title read, Addendum C, Ethical Protection Clause. My eyes widened as I read. Any beneficiary who attempts to claim, redirect, or diminish another beneficiary's designated share shall immediately forfeit their own interest in the trust. I blinked, once, twice, unsure if I was reading correctly. This wasn't just a clause. It was a grenade, quiet, unassuming, perfectly legal, and devastating when deployed. The addendum spelled out, in crystal clear language, that no matter how the family protested, manipulated, or petitioned, any attempt to strip me of my rightful inheritance would automatically strip them of theirs. The clause was ironclad, drafted with surgical precision, immune to vague interpretation. It wasn't a shield. It was a sword. Taped to the back of the document was a small handwritten note on one of Grandpa's old accounting memo pads. The paper was thin, faded at the edges, as though he had written it long before he ever knew when I would read it. His writing, slow and steady as always, read, My childlit daughter, the greatest strength is precision. Keep everything, Grandpa. I traced the ink with my finger, my throat tightening. He had left me more than money, he had left me foresight. He had left me protection. He had left me a reminder that even when the world shifted under my feet, I could still stand if I learned how to anchor myself. But the deeper I read into the clause, the more I understood a harsher truth. This document alone wouldn't stop my family. It wouldn't magically reverse the petition. It wouldn't undo the lies they'd weaponized against me. The court wouldn't simply take my word for it. I needed evidence, strategy, and undeniable precision, a level of defense my parents and sister couldn't twist into a narrative about instability. The addendum was powerful. Yes, but it was a counterpunch, not a shield. It was the first line of offense in a much larger war. I sat on the edge of my bed, the document in my lap, feeling the twin forces of hope and fear wrestling inside me. Grandpa had prepared this for a possibility, a frightening one, that my own family would try to take from me. And here I was, living that nightmare, exactly as he must have feared. But why had he known? Why had he expected this? Did he see something in them that I refused to see? Or had they shown him their nature long before they ever revealed it to me? The betrayal burned all over again, sharper this time, because now I knew Grandpa had tried to protect me from the very people who were supposed to love me. Yet, that sting came with a spark, something fierce, something steady, something that felt like the early whisper of a backbone solidifying. I smoothed the claws onto the blanket beside me. Okay. I whispered to no one and to Grandpa all at once. I have something now. Not everything. But something. It wasn't enough to win. Not yet. But it was enough to begin. I gathered the other folders, organizing them into piles, tax documents, trust statements, correspondence, notarized letters. Each stack felt like a building block, a foundation. Grandpa had left me breadcrumbs, not answers, and piecing them together would take more than hope. It would take strategy, knowledge, and a level of precision I wasn't sure I possessed. But I was willing to learn. I had to be. Because for the first time since the petition arrived, I realized I wasn't walking into that courtroom empty-handed. I had something they didn't expect: preparation. A blueprint, a truth they couldn't erase. And while this clause wasn't enough to end their attack, it was the first stone in a fortress I would build myself brick by brick, document by document, until the family who'd spent my whole life underestimating me finally understood the cost of doing so. They had fired the first shot. Now, I finally had a way to fire back. The Addendum C gave me my first breath of hope, but hope is fragile when you're standing against people who know exactly which narratives will destroy you. My family didn't retreat after receiving notice from the court that I had filed a formal objection. If anything, my refusal to surrender ignited something darker in them: fear, anger, entitlement fused into a single purpose: make me look unfit before I had the chance to defend myself. Their counterattack came fast, sharp, and coordinated, the way only families who have practiced rewriting history for years can manage. 3 days after I found Grandpa's hidden clause, I received a new stack of documents through the court's digital portal. Among them was a freshly filed affidavit from a psychiatrist I had never met. According to this doctor whom my parents had consulted, I displayed concerning emotional volatility, patterns of impulsive spending, and difficulty maintaining stable interpersonal relationships. I thank you for watching. The language was carefully crafted, vague enough to be unfalsifiable, severe enough to raise red flags for any judge deciding whether a conservatorship might be appropriate. My hands shook as I read it. Emotional volatility? The only time I'd cried in front of my family in the last 10 years was when Grandpa died, and even then, my mother told me to keep it together because my grief made Laya uncomfortable. Impulsive spending? I had used the same prepaid phone plan for 7 years. Difficulty maintaining relationships? Try being the daughter raised to believe needing anything from anyone was a burden. But paper lies easily when signed by someone with a medical license. The next blow came when my parents' attorney uploaded a supposed amendment to Grandpa's trust. It claimed that in his final months, Grandpa had expressed regret for dividing assets individually and had instead wanted everything pooled together under joint management for family unity. The signature looked like Grandpa's at first glance. But it wasn't right. There were inconsistencies, strokes too smooth, angles too practiced. The kind of artificial perfection that only appears when someone is tracing, not writing. The notary seal looked newer than it should have been, crisp and precise, lacking the subtle smudge Grandpa's longtime notary always left on his documents. But I knew the truth wouldn't matter unless I could prove it. And right now, they were flooding the court system with a narrative designed to portray me as unstable, reckless, and incapable. And then came Laya. If my parents fought with paper, my sister fought with performance. One morning, I woke to my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications from old acquaintances, high school classmates I barely knew, coworkers, even people I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted before I even unlocked the screen. The first thing I saw was Laya's Instagram story, a crying selfie, mascara smudged, eyes red, a trembling lower lip positioned perfectly for sympathy. The caption read, "Please pray for my family. My sister is going through something dark and scary. We've all tried to help, but she keeps pushing everyone away. She even demanded money from me last month and threatened to cut us off when we couldn't give more. I'm so scared of what she might do next." Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. People calling me selfish, toxic, abusive. People telling her she was so strong for speaking out. Then she posted a carousel of old college photos, unflattering, mid-blink, caught off guard during late-night study sessions when exhaustion warped my face. She paired them with captions implying I'd had breakdowns, that my mental state was deteriorating, and that the family had been carrying me for years. Comments poured in. "She definitely looks unstable here. Honest phase. You're doing the right thing protecting your parents. Some people shouldn't be allowed to control large sums of money. It's dangerous. Dangerous. That word sank into my chest like a stone. People weren't just misunderstanding, they were judging, condemning, building a digital consensus around a version of me that didn't exist. By evening, someone from my old college sent me a screenshot from a community forum where a thread titled, "Is Zoe okay?" speculated whether I was abusing substances, dealing with anger issues, or having a mental break triggered by sudden inheritance. The story had left my family's curated circle and was crawling into the public sphere. And the more people talked about it, the more real it sounded. I tried calling Laya. She didn't answer. I texted her, "Take it down. You are lying and you know it." She replied with a single sentence. Should have signed the agreement. As if her smear campaign was leverage. As if my reputation was a bargaining chip. Hours later, my aunt reposted Laya's story. Then a cousin, then an old neighbor who used to wave at me from across the street. Their combined voices created a tidal wave, pushing me further and further into the role of the unstable daughter who needed to be controlled for her own good. Firststands, those firstings, friends who had previously been neutral began to distance themselves, afraid, confused, unsure whether defending me would attach them to the mess. One even asked gently, "Is any of this true? If you're overwhelmed, you can talk to us." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Overwhelmed? Yes. For the reasons they believed? Absolutely not. This was the lowest point, the valley I didn't see coming. Not because they attacked the trust, but because they attacked me. My name. My stability. My credibility, something far more fragile and far more essential than money. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to build a world in which I had already lost. And for a moment, a terrifying moment, I felt the weight of their narrative pressing down, threatening to bury me under a version of myself I didn't recognize. But valleys, even the darkest ones, don't last forever. And my family had made one fatal mistake. If you're going to rewrite history, you'd better pray the person you're rewriting doesn't keep receipts. The online attacks, the affidavit, the twisted narrative, they all hit like consecutive punches. But none of them knocked the air out of me the way the forged amendment did. That document wasn't just a smear. It was an attempt to rewrite Grandpa's intentions, erase his choices, and weaponize his legacy against me. And something about seeing his name distorted lit a fire inside me sharper than fear. I printed both versions of the amendment, the one my family submitted to the court, and the original trust documents Grandpa kept in his briefcase. I laid them side by side on my kitchen table, turned on every lamp I owned, and studied them with the same intensity I used to study case law during late-night library sessions. At first glance, the forged amendment was clean, too clean. The lines didn't match the subtle wobble Grandpa's hand sometimes had when he signed documents late in the evening. The signature on the fake one was smoother, flawless, almost elegant. Grandpa's real signature wasn't elegant. It was firm, intentional, and carried the weight of someone who'd lived long enough to know the value of permanence. Then I looked at the dates. The forged amendment claimed it was signed in March 2017. But the notary seal had a commission expiration date that didn't make sense. Notaries renew their commissions every few years, and this seal had an expiration window that began after the supposed signing date. A timestamp problem. A misalignment that someone unfamiliar with notary law might overlook, but not someone trained to read documents the way lawyers read people. Looking for the cracks. My pulse picked up. I zoomed in further, scanning the trace signature with the cautious eye Grandpa had taught me to cultivate. The strokes were too uniform. When someone signs their name, microvariations appear from pressure, speed, hesitation. None existed here. Everything was smooth, perfectly curved, as if drawn rather than written. Then I held the 2 pages up to the light. That's when the difference became unmistakable. Grandpa's paper, older, slightly yellowed, held the softness of time. The other page reflected light differently, brighter, whiter, too crisp. I flipped the forged amendment over and squinted at the tiny watermark lines manufacturers embed in modern document stock. A date appeared near the edge, 2023. My hands froze. The paper was manufactured 3 years after the amendment was supposedly signed. Someone hadn't just forged Grandpa's signature. Someone had fabricated the entire document. My breath caught, and for the first time in weeks, a cold, clear calm washed over me. They thought they were smart. They thought I wouldn't look closely. They thought the shame campaign would distract me long enough to keep me from noticing the details. But I noticed. I always noticed. Because Grandpa taught me to. I grabbed the original notary's name from the authentic trust paperwork, Samuel Green. He had notarized nearly every major document Grandpa ever signed. I searched online and found a number listed for him in Arizona. Retired, but still reachable. I called. My voice shook slightly when he answered, but I steadied it. "Mr. Green, I'm calling about a document supposedly notarized by you in March 2017 for my grandfather, Elias." There was a pause, followed by a gentle sigh. "Send me a copy, dear. I'll look at it." I emailed him the forged amendment. He called back in under an hour. "That is not my seal," he said firmly. "And that is not my embossing. I never notarized this. Whoever created this document used a seal I've never owned." I closed my eyes. Validation thundered through me. "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" He didn't hesitate. "Of course. I keep copies of every notarization I've ever performed. And that name your grandfather, I remember him well. Give me an address. I'll send a signed affidavit." When I hung up, my lungs expanded for what felt like the first full breath in months. The truth wasn't just on my side, it was provable, tangible, documentable. Exactly the way Grandpa would have wanted it. But a forged signature and a false notary seal weren't enough in court. Not in a battle like this. I needed expert analysis. Something irrefutable, more sophisticated than my observations. Something that would stand unshaken under cross-examination. So, I hired a forensic document examiner. It cost me $300 money I didn't exactly have now that my job was suspended, but I paid without hesitation. Justice, especially the quiet kind, always demands investment. 4 days later, the examiner sent the report. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding as though I were unwrapping the verdict on my own sanity. The findings were brutal. Precise, beautiful. Finding has shown. The alleged signature of Elias shows evidence of digital tracing. Pixel pattern repetition confirms overlay method rather than natural pen pressure. Finding #2. The pen stroke layering does not match the directionality of natural handwriting. Finding #3. The notary seal is digitally placed and inconsistent with embossing pressure expected on 2017 document stock. Finding #4. Paper analysis confirms stock manufactured in 2023. Conclusion. This document is a forgery. I exhaled, long and slow. Then I read the last line again. A forgery. Not an error. Not a misfiling. Not a misunderstanding. A deliberate, calculated, criminal forgery. Which meant my parents and possibly Laya had crossed a legal line so bright and so glaring that even their hired lawyer couldn't shield them from the fallout. They hadn't just tried to steal from me. They had committed fraud. As I stacked the forensic report next to the affidavit and the addendum C, something in my chest shifted, not soft like hope, not warm like gratitude. Something stronger. Something sharper. Resolve. For the first time, I wasn't just defending what Grandpa left me. I was defending him, his integrity, his decisions, his signature. They tried to weaponize lies. But I had facts. Law, truth. And now I had proof sharp enough to cut through every false narrative they had built. Valley #2 was ending. And the climb back up would be ruthless. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they had finally shown me exactly what they were willing to destroy. And I had finally remembered who taught me how to fight. The forensic report should have been enough to break me open with relief, but instead, it sharpened my instincts. People don't commit forgery unless they're desperate, cornered, or terrified of what happens if the truth stands unchallenged. My family wasn't stupid. Immoral, yes. Manipulative, absolutely, but not stupid. So why risk everything: criminal charges, sanctions, public humiliation, just to take control of my trust? What did they stand to lose? Or more importantly, what had they already lost? That question burrowed under my skin until I couldn't ignore it. The forged amendment, the smear campaign, the rushed conservatorship filing, the sudden insistence that I needed their protection, none of it aligned unless there was something bigger driving them. So I did what Grandpa taught me. I followed the paper trail. Public records aren't hard to access when you know where to look. Property registries, civil filings, bankruptcy notices, tax databases, most of it sits quietly online, waiting for someone to sift through it. I sat on my couch with my laptop, forensic report still open beside me, and typed my parents' address into the property search portal. The first result hit like a punch. Notice of default, pending foreclosure. Filed 92 days earlier. Outstanding balance, $418,700. Deadline to cure the debt, 28 days. My hands went cold. The house, the one they'd poured all their pride into, the one they used as a symbol of their success, was weeks away from being seized by the bank. They hadn't just been struggling. They were drowning. I kept digging. Dad had always been loudest at family dinners about his investment strategies, bragging about beating the market, about timing trades, about how people who work 9 to 5 don't understand real wealth. So I searched his name across financial disclosures, bankruptcy databases, and public investor complaints. What I found made the foreclosure look like a footnote. Dad had been margin trading. Aggressively. He had taken out multiple loans against his brokerage accounts. The market dipped. His positions tanked. And a margin call had liquidated nearly everything. One document showed his account now held 4% of what it did 3 years ago. He hadn't just lost money. He had obliterated their safety net. The entitlement, the rage, the fabricated amendment, it all started to make horrifying sense. Dad hadn't been trying to protect Grandpa's legacy. He'd been trying to refill a financial crater he'd created. I forced myself to keep going. Next was my mother, whose LinkedIn page I rarely checked because her posts always revolved around Laya's successes, never mine. But now her activity revealed something else entirely. Liked articles about managing debt in retirement, negotiating with creditors, preventing wage garnishment. A pattern, a digital trail of quiet panic. Then I opened the county tax portal. My breath caught. Unpaid property taxes. 6 years delinquent. Penalties, accruing monthly. Interest compounding. 6 years. 6 years of neglecting something that basic, that unavoidable, that transparent. And then came Laya. The golden child. The one who mocked me for years for lacking ambition. I searched her name through employment records, unemployment databases, civil filings. At first, nothing substantial appeared, just the usual scraps of data. But then I found a wage garnishment record. She had lost her job 10 months ago. The company had downsized, and she hadn't found work since. When I checked credit filings, the truth bloomed in front of me like a bruise spreading under skin. High-interest personal loans. 4. Revolving credit accounts maxed out. Collections, notices. She was more than struggling. She was collapsing. The sister who had mocked my budget grocery lists and thrift store clothes was living off borrowed money at predatory rates. And her financial ruin wasn't recent, it had been spiraling for years, hidden behind curated social media posts and borrowed handbags. All of them, Mom, Dad, Laya, were financial disasters disguised as a family. A family that had built its identity on the illusion of stability, respectability, wealth. And now that illusion was cracking open, spilling everything they had tried to hide. I leaned back, staring at the mountain of evidence sprawled across my screen. Foreclosure. Liquidated investments. Unpaid taxes. High-interest debt. Unemployment. Collections. They hadn't come after my trust because they wanted control. They came after it because they needed rescue. They wanted me to be their lifeboat. They wanted my trust, Grandpa's gift, to patch the holes in their sinking ship. My chest tightened, not with pity but with clarity. All the cruelty, all the manipulation, all the lies, they had weaponized desperation into entitlement. And desperation is dangerous. Desperation justifies anything in the minds of people unwilling to face their failures. But then I remembered something Grandpa told me once when I was 17, crying in a parking lot after Mom dismissed my acceptance into a scholarship program as cute. Some people will burn your house down just to stay warm. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. They would have stripped me of everything: my autonomy, my reputation, my future, because they couldn't bear the consequences of their own mistakes. But here's the thing about desperation. It explains behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. And it damn sure doesn't justify destroying your own child. As the weight of their situation settled over me, a quiet resolve formed in my chest. This court case wasn't just about proving my competence anymore. It wasn't about the money. It was about drawing a line they could no longer cross. A boundary they could no longer redefine. A truth they could no longer bury under lies. They weren't just greedy. They were drowning. And they wanted to pull me under with them. But I had spent my whole life learning how to breathe underwater. Now, it was their turn to face the surface. The deeper I dug, the clearer everything became: not just the financial wreckage my family was hiding, but the reason they were fighting so viciously, so recklessly, so cruelly. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to survive. And they believed that the only way to survive was to cannibalize me. For a moment, I let myself feel the ache of that realization. Not anger, not fear. Just the quiet, heavy grief of understanding that the people who raised you would rather destroy you than face the consequences of their own choices. But grief wasn't going to save me. Law would. Precision would. Preparation would. And that was something they never saw coming. Because here is the truth I had kept buried deeper than any document in Grandpa's briefcase. I wasn't just some unstable, impulsive, financially incompetent daughter. I wasn't the girl they wrote about in their petition. I wasn't the shadow they shaped in their smear campaign. I was a lawyer. A fully licensed attorney. Bar certified 5 months ago. And I had kept it secret completely, deliberately, fiercely. For 4 years, I'd worked 2 jobs by day and attended law school by night. I studied in library corners no one visited, highlighting casebooks until my fingers cramped. I wrote outlines at 3 a.m., fueled by vending machine coffee and the same stubborn belief Grandpa had drilled into me since childhood: grit lasts longer. I took the bar exam, with shaking hands, and passed on the first try. And I celebrated alone. Not because I didn't have people who might have gone out to dinner with me. A few classmates invited me. My friend Alma sent flowers. My study group threw a party. But I didn't tell my family. Not a word. Not a hint. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They would downplay it, mock it, reshape it into something small, something unimpressive, something they could dismiss as cute. Or worse, they would claim credit for it. This is what happens when you're raised right. We always knew she had potential. No, absolutely not. My law degree was the first thing in my life that belonged entirely to me, not influenced by them, not shaped by their opinions, not earned under their shadow. It was my victory, my labor, my freedom. So I kept it secret until the moment I needed it. And now? I needed it. Once I had the forensic report, the notary affidavit, and the addendum C, the path forward became terrifyingly clear. I wasn't just going to defend myself against the conservatorship. I was going to dismantle their case, expose their fraud, block their access to the trust, and use the law, the same law they tried to weaponize against me, to protect what Grandpa built. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, fingers poised over the keys, and began drafting. Counterpetition. Motion to freeze all trust disbursements. Motion to strike fraudulent exhibits. Allegations of forgery, bad faith filings, and attempted financial exploitation. Every sentence I wrote was a blade. Every paragraph was a shield. Every citation was a nail sealing the coffin of their case. I pulled from everything I'd learned in law and ethics, in trusts and estates, in civil procedure, in evidence. My professors' voices echoed in my head, reminding me to tighten my arguments, sharpen my language, and anticipate every counterpoint. I worked until dawn, fueled by adrenaline and purpose, shape-shifting from the girl they underestimated into the woman Grandpa believed I could be. By the time birds began chirping outside my window, the counterpetition was complete. 46 pages. Meticulously formatted, supported by exhibits, affidavits, and legal precedent. At the top, beneath the case number, one line stood out more than any other. Attorney of record, Zoe M. Harper, Esquire. Seeing it there, official, undeniable, sent a shiver through me. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was reclamation. This was identity. This was the moment the narrative tilted back toward truth. At exactly 7:12 that morning, I uploaded the documents through the court portal. The confirmation email pinged in my inbox, crisp and clean. Filing received. I sat back, letting the weight of it settle inside me, not crushing, but grounding. For weeks, my family had treated me like prey. A vulnerable target, an easy conquest. But now, the ground had shifted. Because the girl they once dismissed walked into this battle not as a victim, but as counsel. They had no idea what was coming next. The morning of the hearing arrived like the edge of a storm, thick, heavy, humming with a pressure I could feel in my bones. I stood in front of my mirror wearing the same charcoal gray suit I'd bought at 19 for a part-time campus job interview. It was a little tight in the shoulders now, the fabric slightly faded, but it felt right. Symbolic. A reminder of who I was before anyone tried to rewrite me. Before money twisted the air around my family. Before the petition threatened to carve my future out of my hands. I gathered my hair back, slipped my bar card into my briefcase, and took a long breath. Today wasn't just a fight. Today was a reckoning. When I reached the courthouse, the steps felt taller than I remembered, like the building itself was testing me one last time. My heart thudded steadily, not frantic, not weak, but focused. Determined. Behind the courtroom doors waited the people who had spent months shredding my reputation, questioning my sanity, forging my grandfather's signature, and telling the world I wasn't capable of managing my own life. The same people who raised me. The same people who should have known me better than anyone. The bailiff opened the door. I stepped in. The courtroom was colder than the hallway, humming faintly with fluorescent lights. There, in the front row, sat my parents and Laya lined up like a curated exhibit of wealth and unity. Designer clothes, polished shoes, hair styled to perfection. A performance of a family who did everything they could for a troubled daughter. The moment they saw me, all three of them rolled their eyes. Not subtle. Not embarrassed. Deliberate. Synchronized. A gesture so small, yet so venomously familiar it nearly made me laugh. They still believed this was a story where I would stumble, apologize, break. Dad leaned toward Mom and whispered, not quietly enough. That girl has never known how to manage money. She never could manage money. Laya smirked at my suit, her gaze sliding down me, like she was confirming I still belonged in the less than category. At their counsel table sat Richard, $500, our confidence radiating off him like cheap cologne. He flipped through a stack of papers with casual arrogance, as though today's outcome had already been purchased. He didn't even look up when I walked past him to the respondents' table. He didn't need to. He thought he knew exactly who I was. He didn't. I set my old briefcase onto the table. The latches clicking open like the first chord of a song no one expected me to play. Inside were 4 tabbed folders: blue, red, green, gold. I rested my hand lightly on them, steady and sure. The bailiff called, "All rise." And the judge entered. A woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through theatrics like a hot knife through butter. We all sat. She reviewed the docket, then looked at my parents' lawyer. Petitioners appear, counsel present. Then her eyes moved to me. Respondent present. Miss Harper, do you have counsel with you today? The air shifted. I could feel my parents straighten. Laya tilted her head, curious. Richard finally paused his page flipping. I stood. My voice was steady, controlled, practiced yet filled with something deeper. Your Honor, I am counsel of record. Silence. Not confused, silence, shocked silence. Silence that snapped through the room like a cord pulled too tight. My mother's mouth fell open. Dad blinked rapidly, as though trying to process a language he didn't speak. Laya's smirk evaporated. Richard's jaw tightened just a fraction, the first crack in his composure. The judge nodded slowly. Very well, Miss Harper. Proceed. I opened the first folder, labeled gold. Your Honor, Exhibit A. The Ethical Protection Clause Addendum C, signed and notarized by my grandfather. It stipulates automatic forfeiture for any beneficiary who attempts to seize another beneficiary's inheritance. I handed it to the bailiff. The judge studied it with a growing frown. Richard shifted in his seat. My parents stopped breathing. Then I opened the second folder blue. Exhibit B, forensic analysis of the amendment submitted by the petitioners. The report concludes the document is a forgery. I listed each finding clearly, fact by fact, blow by blow. The signature, digitally traced. The notary seal inconsistent with embossing pressure. The paper stock manufactured in 2023 despite claiming a 2017 signing date. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face hardened. I opened the third folder green. Exhibit C, affidavit from the original notary, Mr. Samuel Green. He confirms he never notarized the amendment presented by the petitioners. His documented ledger supports this. The judge took the affidavit, lips compressing. Finally, I opened the fourth folder red. This one hurt to compile. This one showed the ugliest part of the fight. Exhibit D, evidence of libel and malicious misrepresentation conducted by the petitioners, including fabricated online posts, false allegations of mental instability, and coordinated attempts to damage my reputation in service of their conservatorship claim. I laid out screenshots, timestamps, archived versions of deleted posts. Every lie. Every smear. Every attempt to break me publicly. By the time I finished, the silence was suffocating. My family sat frozen caught, exposed, unraveling. Richard cleared his throat. Your Honor, if the court would grant a continue. Denied, the judge cut sharply. You and your clients have provided fraudulent documents and unsubstantiated claims. We proceed now. My mother began to cry, not grieving tears, but cornered tears. Dad's face flushed an angry red. Leah stared at the floor, jaw tight. The judge straightened her papers. Her ruling came like a gavel made of steel. Petition for conservatorship is denied and dismissed with prejudice. I exhaled. She wasn't done. Under Addendum C, the forfeiture clause is enforceable. Petitioners will forfeit their entire share of the trust effective immediately. Mom let out a shaky gasp. Dad whispered, No, no. Leah covered her mouth. The judge continued. Furthermore, this court imposes sanctions of $20,000 for filing falsified documents. A's, Clissons, and then the final strike. This matter is referred to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal forgery and fraud. The sound of the gavel was the cleanest, sharpest sound I had ever heard. I gathered my folders. My suit felt lighter. The courtroom door didn't feel heavy when I pushed it open this time. Behind me, my family's world was collapsing. Ahead of me, my own was just beginning. The days after the hearing felt unreal at first, as if my body had walked out of that courtroom, but my mind was still inside it, replaying every moment in slow motion. The silence after the gavel. The shock frozen onto my family's faces. The sudden absence of a weight I'd been carrying so long I didn't know it was there until it was gone. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood, surviving your family isn't the same as being defined by them. And I was done letting them define me. The legal fallout unfolded rapidly. The forfeiture clause was enforced within 30 days, exactly as the judge ordered. My parents and sister lost every cent of their inheritance. The shares they were once so confident were theirs, spoken about at dinner parties, woven into future plans, used as leverage to control me, were gone with a single legal activation Grandpa had put in place decades earlier. It was poetic, in a way. They had tried to weaponize the trust against me, and the trust itself had turned back on them. When the trust administrator sent me the final distribution notice, my hands trembled. I hadn't fought this hard to get rich. I had fought because it was mine. Because Grandpa wanted me protected, because no family should have the power to strip someone of their autonomy. But seeing it in writing, seeing the full balance transferred into an account under my sole control, it hit me that I had truly, finally reclaimed what they tried so ruthlessly to steal. Meanwhile, their world unraveled. Within 8 weeks, the foreclosure became final. The house I grew up in, polished floors, curated decor, the living room, where I'd been told countless times to lower my voice, was repossessed by the bank. I saw a listing online one day: foreclosed property needs love, sold as is. The photos looked small, sad, hollow. Maybe because that house had never felt like a home to me, or maybe because a home built on hierarchy and cruelty will always collapse eventually. My parents moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Mom emailed distant relatives claiming they were downsizing for lifestyle reasons. But public records painted the truth more starkly: eviction notices, delinquent taxes, defaulted loans. The facade they had curated for decades was cracking in real time, and all they could do was scramble to tape the pieces back together. Leah fared no better. With the forfeiture clause activated, the lake house she bragged about for years was reassigned under the secondary beneficiary plan. Grandpa had designated it to a local community foundation if his family ever contested the trust. Within weeks, the foundation announced it would be converted into a summer leadership retreat for low-income high school girls. Leah filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy shortly after. I heard through a cousin that she cried in the courthouse hallway, not because her finances were in ruins but because Zoe won. Even in her worst moment, she framed it as a competition she lost, not a consequence she earned. And yet, I felt no triumph in their downfall. Only distance, only clarity. The real story wasn't about what they lost. It was about what I found. With the trust finally secure, I made my first major decision, not something flashy or impulsive, but something that felt like a continuation of Grandpa's legacy. I established the Elias Harper Scholarship Fund for young women who, like me, had been told to figure it out without any support. Women who had grit but not resources. Women who needed one person to believe in them the way Grandpa believed in me. The first time I saw the scholarship website go live, I cried harder than I did when the judge dismissed the conservatorship. Because this was something that felt right. Something that felt like healing instead of revenge. Something that felt like stepping out of generational harm into generational restoration. Next, I bought a small condo, not luxurious, not extravagant, but mine. Truly mine. I spent weekends wandering through home decor aisles, picking out plants, lamps, throw pillows, framed prints of landscapes Grandpa used to take me to. Every choice in that space was deliberate, gentle, and entirely for me. It was the first place I'd ever lived that didn't carry someone else's expectations inside its walls. A soft place to land, a place where silence felt peaceful instead of dangerous. And then came the biggest shift of all. My new law practice. I rented a narrow office downtown, above a bakery that always smelled like warm cinnamon. I furnished it with secondhand desks and a refurbished sofa. I ordered simple business cards: Zoe Harper, Esquire. Family asset defense and inheritance protection. Because no one should have to go through what I did alone. Because financial abuse hides behind pretty family photos. Because conservatorship petitions can become weapons. Because people lose themselves long before they lose their money. Clients found me faster than I expected: women whose parents tried to seize their inheritances, sons manipulated into signing away rights, elderly individuals whose families claimed they were forgetful just to gain control. Every story cracked something open in me, but it also strengthened me. I wasn't just fighting my family anymore. I was fighting a system that too often sides with the loudest voices instead of the truest ones. And somewhere in the quiet moments of building this new life, I realized something that made my breath catch. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. And not the kind of living that's reactive, fragile, or bracing for the next blow. The kind where you build something real. Where you choose your own future. Where you create the kind of safety no childhood ever promised you. My family's destruction wasn't my victory. My transformation was. Grandpa once said, "Your strength isn't loud, but it lasts." He was right. And now, for the first time, I was finally becoming the woman he always knew I could be. 6 months passed before the final thread of my old life tugged at me again. It came in the form of a short, oddly formal email from my mother. The subject line read simply, "Checking in." I stared at it for nearly a full minute before opening it, bracing myself for whatever narrative she might be trying to spin this time. Inside was a single paragraph. "Zoe, Mom is sorry if things got too tense. I only wanted what's best for you. I hope you're doing well. If you think it's appropriate, I'd like us to talk again." There it was, half apology, half excuse. No mention of the conservatorship, No mention of the forgery. No mention of the months spent calling me unstable, of the smear campaign, of the courtroom humiliation. She wasn't apologizing for what she did. She was apologizing that it became too tense. As if tension had simply floated into our lives like bad weather rather than being manufactured by her choices. But I didn't feel anger when I read it. What I felt instead was distance, an ocean-sized distance I no longer felt obligated to swim across. So, I wrote back, short and steady. I wish you peace, Mom. But I choose to move forward without looking back. A sentence that once would have felt impossible. Now it felt like truth. 2 weeks later, Laya reached out. Her message was longer, less polished, messier in the way a person becomes when the world they thought they owned collapses beneath them. She said she wanted to meet and talk. To clear things up, to start over. But wanting to start over isn't the same as doing the work of repair. And I wasn't ready to sit across from the sister who had once weaponized my vulnerability to thousands of strangers online. So I told her the truth in a way I never had before. I'm not ready. Healing for me means space. Maybe someday, but not now. She didn't reply. And that silence, for the first time, didn't hurt. It felt like boundary. It felt like choice. Life continued in its quiet, steady rhythm. My scholarship fund grew. My small law practice slowly filled with clients who thanked me more deeply than I knew how to accept. My condo started to feel lived in rather than borrowed, plants thriving, books stacked on tables, sunlight settling across the rug each morning in a way that made the place feel gentle. One afternoon, after finishing a case that hit a little too close to home, I sat at my desk and glanced at the framed picture sitting beside my laptop. Grandpa in his old navy sweater, eyes warm, smile understated but knowing. The same picture my sister once used online to portray him as confused. I lifted the frame, tracing the edge lightly with my thumb. I kept every document, just as you told me to, Grandpa. But the most important thing, I kept myself. And it was true. I had kept every receipt, every document, every piece of evidence that became a lifeline in court. But the greater victory wasn't legal. It was internal. I hadn't let their lies overwrite my identity. I hadn't let their desperation become my responsibility. I hadn't let their version of me replace the real one. Walking away from family doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like mourning what you hoped they'd be. But in that quiet moment with Grandpa's picture, I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I was acknowledging, accepting, rebuilding. And somewhere along the path, I had discovered something I spent my whole childhood searching for. Home. Not as a place. Not as people who failed to protect me. But as a groundedness inside myself I had never known before. A place built from truth, from clarity, from the kind of love that doesn't control, diminish, or demand a performance. A place where peace wasn't conditional. That's the message I want you, whoever is listening, to take away from this story. Love without respect is control. Your worth isn't measured by who chooses not to see it. And walking away doesn't mean you failed, it often means you finally learned how to protect yourself. So now I'll ask you the same question I had to ask myself when the dust finally settled. If you were in my position, facing betrayal, lies, and the choice between forgiveness and boundaries, what would you choose? Forgiveness? Distance? Something in between? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.